So recently my friend Penelope sold her home and she moved back across the country, and then she moved again. So she has been going back and forth on this trail around all around places. So Penelope, what was it like for you as a person who was moving, selling a house, then moving, getting everything together, going all that distance? Like, what kind of planning did you do?
I did so much planning. Like I had to plan extremely ahead of time. I would say the first thing that I had to do when I was flipping my house in California that I actually lived in, it was our primary residence. And we bought it for $995,000 and then we held it for 5 years. So when we went to sell it, I just graduated high school a year and a half early, and I had all this time, and my mom was like, you are going to manage the project. You're going to manage the design, the paint, everything. She flew to Costa Rica and I managed the entire project, just me. And I had to make sure the entire house, all the furniture was moved out or given away or donated. And I was living in an empty house at one point. We didn't have a table to eat dinner at, like nothing. There was nothing. And then we had contractors that were coming in and out, and I had to manage those contractors. And I only had $60,000 to work with as the renovation budget, which in California is not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
Prices are high. So while you were doing that, I remember, like, as we were talking, there would be people coming in and out, like they were like asking you questions about, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And you were just kind of managing that and managing life. And you did great at it. It got done really quickly. I mean, it only took you, what, a couple months, right?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Oh my God. It was only 3 weeks. It felt like it lasted a little bit longer than that because we were like talking about it for a while. And so then you got your house under contract. And then there was the other challenge of the variation in pricing in California being at that time. And we were talking about, like, what was that, like, not even a year ago? How long ago was it?
That was like June, July.
So a few months ago. And so it's the heat of the summer. Everybody was wanting to move. It's that time of the year when people are wanting to get their kids settled before school starts again and that kind of thing. So you had a lot of showings at once, but even before you got to that point, one of the issues that you confronted was, how do you price that property? Right. Remember, there was a neighbor house that had sold for, was it less because they didn't have as much features, or what was it?
So their agent listed their home for less than what the market would tolerate. Another house up the hill, but up my hill, had sold for 1.9. Now I know this. And the house they were listing was smaller than ours, but it had some other features that ours also didn't have. But it was also at the bottom of the hill, so it was walkable to the school. But the agent listed it for a lower price, and she didn't do any CMAs. She admitted she didn't do a CMA report, and so she just listed it for whatever they wanted her to, and she could have listed it for higher, and she could have gotten it for more, but they didn't. And we ended up listing our house for 1,395, and it ended up going great. But we had to be very particular about how we did that, because if we had listed it for any higher, we would have looked overpriced in that neighborhood.
And that's important, because we've been learning lately, you and I, as we've been studying and getting ready for your real estate exam, is that, pricing is important. CMAs are important. Paying attention and being aware of the market that you're working in is so important for agents to pay attention to, because, sometimes our sellers, their information or what they believe their house is worth is too high, or sometimes it's too low. And it kind of, to come in and do our duty of, like, helping to advise them. I mean, we can't choose the price for them, but we need to show them the recent sales in the area. And luckily you were on top of that, and you knew what was going on, and look how much money it saved you that you could have potentially left behind by not pricing your property right. And like you said, if you had priced it too high, then it would be stagnant, because at that time houses were selling in like 2 or 3 days, not even a day. Yeah. I mean, it's still that way in some areas, but yeah, there it was super hot. And so you pointed out something too. There was some differences. That house at the bottom of the hill was walkable to the school, which is desirable to people who have kids that go to that school, right? Now that might not matter as much to somebody who doesn't have kids in the school, but yeah, that could have an impact on value. All these little things that we have to think about when we're pricing a home. So then you packed everything up, you got the house sold, you got it closed. Everything went pretty smooth, if I remember right. There weren't a whole lot of hiccups there. You got lucky on that. So then you moved across country. So you
Yeah.
were going to Florida. You're back in California now, but at that time you're going to Florida.
Yeah.
So what was that process like? So you moved, your stuff moved ahead of you, right? Or moved behind you. What was the deal? You got your stuff like 2 weeks after you got to Florida, right?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing though, the best part about that house that we listed for 1,395 was that we sold for 1.5, which is
Yeah, because everything was going for more than the list price.
right. And
If
if
you
we had
price it at 1.5, it may not, you didn't know, right? You can't.
exactly.
Yeah. So
And
yeah.
the seller really wanted to list for 1.5, but we knew, like me and the agent knew that that was not going to work in our favor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's good that we did that, but it's hard because you have to like negotiate that with like people's emotions when you're selling a house.
Right.
So it's important to just be mindful of that. But to answer your question, moving from California to Florida, it was a lot because I was still 17 at the time, and it's basically just me and like all my stuff. And so I just like took basically a leap of faith, and I flew to Florida, and I did the home renovation, and I didn't have any of my stuff. Like I was living out of my suitcase for 6 months, and it's
Oh my gosh.
intense. And it's like moving from one renovation to another renovation. So it's like one unfinished project to another one, which can be very unsettling. But it's also really fun for me because something I love doing. But like the paint fumes and the boxes everywhere, like you don't know where your sweater is or where your toothbrush is, or you can't like wear some of your favorite clothes, and it's definitely like a process. And then you have to manage the contractors. Like you now live with contractors basically.
Right.
It's not just you anymore. It's like you and the contractors. It's like
Well, and there were multiple contractors doing different work that had to be coordinated. A lot of people don't think about that. Like usually one contractor doesn't do all, right? You have one guy to do the plumbing, you have one guy to do this. So whenever you're trying to manage keeping those people out from being underfoot each other, and also one project has to be done before we can start the next one. So if somebody lags behind here, they push this down on this end. So in the end, so just to clarify for the people who don't know you, so you had gone down there to Florida to specifically to renovate this house with a partner. And so this was something that you've always wanted to do. And so like, that was like your experience of going to a completely new place where you didn't really, I mean, I know you've lived in Florida in the past, but it's been a long time. So you didn't really know anybody, and you're just going there, showing up. You just, you're just, this is like your first job to do out of high school, and you're going completely by yourself across the country to take on this activity. So how did you meet the contractors? How did you pick them?
Went to Sherwin-Williams. That's how I found like my painter, the person to remove the popcorn ceiling. And then what I really like to do is like, if I like that contractor and I see them and they give me a good bid, and because I usually test out a bunch of contractors and get different bids, and then the one that I feel is most reasonable, I'll use. And if I like their character, like it's really important for me, like they need to be a good person and that I feel like is trustworthy. Like if there's like some fraudulent things going on or they're not licensed, it's really, really important to me that I check those things and make sure they have insurance, they're licensed, that they're all good. And I want to see their work. Even I actually went to people's houses and seen the work they did to make sure they're really honest and true and fair, because there are a lot of contractors out there that aren't honest, true, and fair. So like trust but verify, I've learned over the past years. And then I basically use the contractor I like. Usually they have a lot of contacts. They know people that they trust and work with. And so then I'm like, okay, great. And then those people know people. So it's like, if I trust that one person, then usually I can get like 5 to 10 contacts out of that person, and then another 5 to 10 out of the other person. And so that's been the best way for me to get good, trustworthy contractors.
Yeah. And plus, you made a good point. Like Sherwin-Williams is where all painters go to buy their paint. Well, I shouldn't say all, but most professional painters are going to have a commercial account at Sherwin-Williams. And so like we would always go out when we were going to paint that day, or we were working on a house, and go pick up the paint in the morning. And there would be a lot of people that would be professional painters that are there usually very, very early in the morning. Most painters get started about the time Penelope gets up. She's an extreme early riser, you guys. And so, well, I'm still like fumbling around trying to get started. She's out there jogging, and the painters are out there painting, right? So we go out. So you go to Sherwin-Williams early in the morning, or if you ask the manager at Sherwin-Williams, hey, there's usually a cork board, and say, which one of these guys do you see in here all the time? Because the person buying all the paint is the person doing all the business, and they can usually guide you in the right direction if you're new to the area, if you've never hired a painter before. Everybody thinks they can paint. It's a
Right.
funny thing, right? Everybody thinks, like I talk to people all the time. They're like, I painted this myself. I'm like, yeah, I know. Right?
That's hilarious.
Because, you've got all these like where it's touched the ceiling and all that sort of thing. And if you only do painting, and that's not a dig on the homeowner. If you only paint your house like every 5 or 10 years, how would you ever get to be able to do that really well and easily? These guys can come in and they paint so fast. You can't just like, whew, they're in and out.
Wow.
It's amazing. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And so it's sometimes like time is money. Like everybody thinks, well, I'll save some money on painting by doing it myself. And if you like painting and you're good at it and you're pretty steady handed, then cool. But if you're not, painting is one of those things that can make a huge impact on the way your house looks really quickly. And I'm sitting here thinking about how I should take some of my own advice because I need to go paint several rooms in my room that I haven't yet, but okay. So then the next thing that you did, you got the painting done. We also talk about the difference between California and Florida. What were you seeing when you got to Florida that you weren't necessarily expecting when you left California as far as the market goes or the way that things were done?
The market in California was still like relatively hot when I was there. And when I moved to Florida, the market was much slower. People weren't buying as many houses. The inventory was much higher and there wasn't a lot of people buying. So it was
in that part of Florida, but then there's still parts of Florida where it's like California.
I was in St. Augustine.
Yeah.
So,
St. Augustine is a little bit more north, but as you get further south into Florida right now, it's still like you can't, you got to live under a bridge kind of, you're looking so hard for a place to rent or live. Right. So, I mean, you saw a shift in the market, but it was still hot. You were still busy. There was still a lot of people looking in that section of Florida, although it's like, more of the, you had a lot more neighbors around you that had been there a long time, right? There wasn't that transition. Yeah. So there was a lot of long-term residents of that neighborhood. Then another thing about that neighborhood that was interesting is that you had some investment groups that were active in that area too, that were doing a lot of stuff. And so a lot of people were taking interest in purchasing homes in that area. So when you went to get done with this project, when you were putting the finishing touches on the project in Florida, was that difficult to get that thing wrapped up? Like at the end there, I know it's, to me, it was always the hardest part was the punch list. We would always say like that last leg of the journey when you're like ready to sell this thing, but you're not quite ready to sell this thing because there's this little teeny stuff and you get a little bit neurotic in the end. How did you get past that anxiety of calling it done, right? Like talk about that.
I mean, I would say working with a partner is different, right? Like when you're working alone, it's much easier than when you're working with a partner. And I think the biggest thing is like the checklist. Like once you see the checklist, this, and this are done. Okay, now we're ready. And that's how you just kind of like get really organized and really granular about all the things that need to happen. Because in real estate and in sales, like you need to make sure that that list is like done because there are so many little things that you wouldn't normally think about.
Yeah.
Like literally like make sure all the lamps are on, make sure all the lights work. It's like, wait, what? Like those are little things that you have to make sure function and work properly before you're showing it to a bunch of people. So I think that's like the punch list is really, really important.
Well, I mean, I remember one time I went to show a house. It was beautiful. But the funny part is that whoever had taken off the covers on the outlets to paint had forgotten to put them back up. So we've got this 100% perfectly renovated home. It's gorgeous. They've done such a nice job. Everything looks great. And what do you think the first thing people said when we walk in the door? They're like,
where are the outlet covers?
There's no outlet covers. I mean, that's $25. Like even if they were gone forever, who cares, right? But that's what people zero in on. Any flaw, when everything else is perfect, a small flaw becomes more transparent. Whereas, if you've got a fixer-upper, a missing toilet won't be noticed. But if you've got a perfect home, then you've got a missing outlet cover.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you really got to be really, really down and dirty with that and make sure you get every single thing done. And so it's interesting when you were going through this, then you got done, then you came back to California. So since June of June roughly of 2022 was when that whole thing was going on. You left in like right around Christmas time, I think, right? Like right around that time. So now it's Christmas 2022. You're gone for a few months. Now you're back. It's the end of February in 2023. So we all know, like, seriously, things have started to shift in a different direction in California. So you're in a different part of California now. You're in what part of California are you in right now? Malibu. Hot area where everybody wants to live, right? Even I'm from Ohio, and I even know that, I've seen 2.5 Men. I know everybody wants to live in Malibu. You're like, what show is that? She's too young. It's a very famous sitcom set in Malibu. But anyway, so everybody wants to live in Malibu. So what about right now? What is the market like right now? If I had the funds and the energy to come to Malibu and live there, how hard is it going to be for me to find a house right this second or place to live?
The inventory here is actually pretty low right now.
Yeah.
And that would be my best answer for you. I'm having trouble finding a property here that I can buy like in Malibu. So I'm looking at other areas like Orange County, just any cities in there that are maybe good for Airbnb investments. So I'm really trying to find what's the best market that's going to appreciate the next 10 to 15 years, because I'm interested in real estate.
And you talked to me, we were talking about Airbnb the other day, and we were talking about like what a lot of people don't think about when they're talking about those Airbnb rentals is the overhead of holding that Airbnb rental when no one's in it. And we have to factor that in when we have to figure out how much do we have to get each day to cover all those expenses, and what is the rate per day that's average for that area, right? And remember, we were talking about in one area that didn't add up at the price that the person wanted for the property. I mean, the person wanted X amount of dollars and needed this much renovation. And when you think about how much are you going to get in rent per day, it just wasn't there. Didn't come together.
Exactly. And that happens a lot in real estate investments. Like you're doing the numbers before you go to the walk the property, and then you're like, but it's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, I had one guy tell me one time, well, I get $2,000 rent a month from this property that he had, which may sound, if you're in California, may not sound like a lot, but here in Ohio, it's a lot. And I'm like, okay, but how much did you have to pay for that?
Right.
So if you look at the percentage of the spread between what he had invested and his return on his investment versus a cheaper property, actually the percentage of profit was much higher for him if he bought the less expensive property than the more expensive property. But other factors go into that. Maybe the person feels like the more expensive property would be easier to rent because the location is very vital to a big industry in the area. There's other things that go into that decision making, but sometimes higher rent equals higher overhead. We got to make sure that the percentages add up and make sense, right?
Right. And I know that some people do invest in real estate and they maybe don't make any money for the first 3 years, but then they're okay with that because they know, 10 years down the road, they're going to be making triple what they weren't making. So I think it's interesting. I remember talking to you actually about a guy who has a property and he is actually losing money every month, and he has a long-term rental, but plus the insurance and the maintenance for the property, everything, he's literally losing money every month. And he even asked me like, buy my property because I can't manage it anymore. And he has renters in it. And so I remember talking to you about that. And it's true. Like some people, like the numbers don't work and they're like in debt every month because of it, which is crazy to think about, but it's true.
But if he's in California and he happens, we don't ever know the future, right? But say that we do have another big push in value again, he may make it up in appreciation, but can he afford to hold it in the meantime? That's the big
that's the thing. Can he afford to hold it in the meantime? We'll see.
Is it worth holding in the meantime? Sometimes we, even if we can afford to do something, is it logical to do it?
Yeah.
Well, Penelope, thanks for talking to me today. This was interesting. We'll do this again soon, but so we're all going to come visit you in Malibu. Just me.
Seriously, you can come anytime. I mean it. I really mean it.
So I'm excited for your cross country moving going on. You've had a very interesting couple of months. So thanks for sharing that with us. We appreciate it.
No problem.